back, listeners, to the Mindful Living podcast with your host, Sana, where we explore ways to live a more balanced, joyful, and intentional life. Now, today we have an incredible guest, Sal Holden, a kinesiologist, intuitive life coach, speaker, and number one Amazon best-selling author of Thrive and a Joyful Life. Now, for over 14 years, Sal has empowered thousands of women internationally to overcome burnout, reclaim their energy, and create a life they love. Her personal journey of transformation, from overcoming personal hardships to building a thriving business and life as well, gives her a unique perspective on this deep connection between physical well-being and mental resilience, and that's what we are going to talk about today on Mindful Living. So with that, Sal, welcome to this show, and we are so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much, Sana, for a beautiful introduction and absolutely wonderful to be here. And I'm excited to share hopefully some nuggets that could be helpful for all the listeners today as well.
Definitely. So before we talk about the relation between physical well-being and emotional well-being, can you share your personal experience with burnout and how did it affect your mental and emotional health?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went through significant burnout back in 2020. I'd been pushing myself for a very long time. I'd been a single mum for about 10 years at that point, as well as had my own business for 10 years. And I think there was just a lot of compounding things where I was losing a lot of capacity within my nervous system, feeling more and more stretched. And there was quite a few telltale signs as well. When I was working out at the gym, I started halfway through the workout, I would feel very emotional and teary and feel like I just had to keep pushing myself. There was definitely a loss of motivation and a loss of joy as well. And so all of those things kind of compounded together, uh, having long term chronic stress for a long period of time, as well as I literally had three acute stresses within the 1 week. And that was a significant relationship breaking down, as well as one of my daughters also left home. We were totally fine in our relationship, but it was just I guess the grief of her flying the nest, as well as a dear friend of mine also passed away from cancer in the same week. And it honestly felt like it was such a huge shock to my entire nervous system. And because I'd been pushing things for such a long time, those three events compounded on top of all of the other long term chronic stress really just pushed me over the edge. And essentially, I found that I could not function for more than 2 hours a day. I was literally peeling myself up off the floor to work in my business as much as I could, and then literally collapsing on the floor again afterwards. I found it extraordinarily difficult to prepare things like a simple meal, to have a shower, to brush my hair. All of those things felt like it took so much energy, whereas previously I was very self motivated, very dynamic, would power through a lot of things in the day, and it was just such a shock because I'd always felt like no matter what happened, I'd always find the energy, I'd rally my energy, and I was always able to push through. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't able to do that, and it took a significant period of time to recover from that, and really understanding. I guess the biggest shock for me, because I'd been doing transformational mindset work for such a long period of time, I understood how the mind worked and what the connection was with the body. But it still absolutely shocked me how loud my inner critic became and how much my mental well being was affected. And thankfully, I knew the exact steps of what I needed to do to be able to come out of that and to heal myself and to not listen so much to the inner critic. However, it just again really reminded me of the importance of understanding or having the tools to be able to support ourselves when our physical energy does get into a lower state or when we're dealing with chronic or perhaps acute stresses in our life.
I think that's towards the extreme end of stress, chronic stress. And, to be honest, it did sound very, you know, intimidating, very, uh, scary. So, I
Mm,
think now is the time when we as individuals we should do a bit of deep self introspection on with to understand what are the symptoms or maybe early warning signs, and before even getting into this trap, we should definitely take some proactive actions to prevent it. And of course, with insights from you, I think definitely our listeners can um, navigate on this path. So now, talking about the body mind connection, because it all starts with this connection. So, as a kinesiologist and life coach, you have done research on this deep connection between physical health and emotional well being. How exactly this connection works?
So it happens on both a biological level as well as an energetic level. And I think if anybody can think of the time where they felt perhaps really flawed by some news, very stressed, you will know that that impacts the physical body instantly. We might have tightness in the stomach, we could have tightness in the shoulders, we may get a headache, all of those things. So it is physically impacting the body. And the way that that actually happens with what we're interpreting as survival responses or stress responses, or our mind is very uh, hooked into protecting us and keeping us safe. So when we interpret something as a threat or unsafe, our body will release stress hormones, which most people are aware of, adrenaline, cortisol, all of those things. Now, that's totally fine if it's a short situation and things like that. However, longer term, it drives a lot of inflammation, which can create like a lot of brain fog and a lot of other issues within the body as well. So you have your biological or biochemical response to a stress how we're interpreting a particular situation, whether that's life threatening or not. And we also have an energetic response on the emotional level. So, if somebody, say, is feeling very powerless about a particular situation, then often we will feel like, what's the point? Why bother? Why even try? Our energy can be really quite low when we're in a powerless state or a grief state, which can also feel like a state of powerlessness as well, or even deep fear where we've gone into that freeze state. It is very, very low level energy. Whereas if you think about the emotion of, say, anger, generally there's a lot more energy in the emotion of anger. Most people are wanting to throw something or hit something or slam something. Generally, when we're in a state of anger, we've got a lot more energy activated to be able to do things. And then if we think about even irritation or frustration, that's a lighter energy, obviously, than anger. It still doesn't feel great, but at the same time, there's a little bit more energy and movement within that. Whereas when we move into, say, courage or even excitement and passion, generally, people are jumping up and down with joy, or there's a lot more energy actually available. And I realized that I could totally start to shift my physical energetic state, or the energy that I had available in my physical body, just from shifting what I was actually focusing on or what I was telling myself on an emotional level as well. And that became very, very powerful for me, not only whilst I was going through burnout, because my mind was very focused on what could harm me or what could hurt me. It had a lot of anxiety and was very fear based, to looking out for everything, because that's what tends to happen. The more compromised we become within the physical body, the more hyper vigilant we become to anything that could harm us or hurt us. Which has us very focused on fearful things, or even predicting or thinking that, where we're going to catastrophizing and things like that. Whereas obviously, when we're feeling more calmer, more relaxed within the physical body, then the mind is able to think about things that we're more grateful for, or move more into that state. So that's where there's a very big interlinking key there with the physical, the mental, the emotional, and I would even say the spiritual, or the connection to self that we also have.
Wow, that's such a detailed explanation, Sal. And thinking from a perspective, for women, you know, we have different phases in our lives where it's kind of a more physical reason or physical connection with our emotional state of mind. Because we have so many, sometimes so much on our plates, and um, it's a very difficult position to be there. Um, Maybe who are not married or maybe married, working women or homemakers, different roles, daughters, wives, sisters, or just a simple individual. So, how exactly it is more important to address this connection between physical and emotional well-being for women?
Yeah, I think that's such a valid point, Sana, and I think, yeah, there's so much of that that I both relate to and absolutely agree with as well. And we can become so adaptable and flexible to what everybody else is wanting and needing us to be that we can actually end up losing ourselves in the process and end up almost like denying or disassociating from our body as a way of unconsciously coping with certain situations, which can be very, very difficult as well. And so I think one of the biggest things, certainly for me, was sitting with myself each day and just putting a timer on for 5 minutes, even 2 minutes could be enough to start to bring deeper awareness and to really feel into how am I actually really feeling today? What does my body feel like? How am I feeling emotionally? Because that often gives us clues. Whereas when we constantly are like, oh, it's right, I'll just push through, or we put on a brave face, or we
Mm.
just are like, oh, I haven't got time to worry about me at the moment. Everybody else needs something from me. And unconsciously, that can be meeting one or more of our six human needs as well at a big level. So it can be quite addictive as well because it can give us a sense of self worth, a sense of
Mhm.
significance, a sense of adding value to the world and add to our self concept or our self identity, which can keep us hooked into these situations. And particularly if we're continuing to abandon ourselves or do things that are in the long term detrimental to our well being, it's really important that we actually really start to listen to our body and to those signs and symptoms sooner before later. Because certainly, as the pathway I've figured out and learned, was that the more compromised we become, the more exhausted we are, the more we are burnt out, the longer the recovery time. And so if we can get that at a quicker time frame or before we get too bad, if that makes sense, getting it at the earlier stages means that we're not affected so deeply. And I think a huge part of this is also setting boundaries. And it's also challenging the belief that our worth as a person is linked to or tied to our productivity or how much we do for others. And I think that that's a really big piece of unraveling some of where we overgive and in a way that's detrimental to our well-being.
True, true. And definitely, it does make a huge, huge sense. Also, you mentioned healing unprocessed trauma and nervous system regulation. So, how do our past experiences physically manifest in the body? And what are some ways to start the healing process?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think unhealed trauma can manifest many different ways in the body depending on the event, the experience. But most importantly, what we've interpreted that event or that experience to mean about ourselves. And it's one of the things that we do most unconsciously. And so challenging some of those past narratives or those what we've actually made things mean through our experiences and through the lens of a child. Often we're not privy to other perspectives at that particular time. So we've taken in an event or experience perhaps as a child and may have made it mean we weren't lovable or we weren't enough or we should have been doing better or we could have told any number of stories around that. And so actually starting to challenge those beliefs is most important. Through my studies as a kinesiologist and also the metaphysical aspects of what plays out in the body, and Gabor Mate writes a lot about this with his books. There's a couple of really good books on this, When the Body Says No and The Body Keeps the Score. And Louise Hay did a lot of work around this as well in terms of understanding the mental and the emotional patterns and the states of dis-ease that they actually cause in the body. And certainly through the work that I've done, I know that the adrenals in particular, which when we go through burnout, that means that our adrenals are very fatigued and may not be producing the amount of adrenaline and cortisol that we actually need in order to have the energy. And that also robs us of our steroid hormones as well, which can definitely impact our physical energy. A lot of that comes from a feeling powerless in our life. And so that's where we're constantly living within that survival state. Many other things can manifest if we're feeling a lack of support. That could show up within the spine because the spine is what essentially represents that level of support within the body as well. So you can kind of take any mental or emotional thing, and you can see how that may manifest within the body on a physical level as well. And so being able to heal those particular things is really, really important in order to come back to having full health and well-being and taking care of ourselves in a really great way as well. And that's a lot of the work that I do with people is really helping them to understand that. And a lot of the time when we've gone through or had what we may call, big traumas or little traumas within our life. And little traumas can be very innocent things that have happened within our life, but because of the way that we've perceived them, that has impacted our sense of lovability or our sense of worth in the world and the level of safety that we're able to feel within our nervous system. And from working with thousands of people and also my own experience, I've realized that there's so much entrainment that happens within our nervous system. So if we grew up in an environment where we didn't feel safe, perhaps expressing ourselves or feeling particular emotions, or just even, we weren't safe in that particular environment, our nervous system learns to live within that fight flight response constantly. And so this keeps people in a state of hypervigilance. And it's almost learning how to retrain the nervous system to relearn what safety actually feels like within our body and within our environment that promotes and creates a deeper level of healing. So sorry, Sana, I feel like I kind of got a bit off track with that question. But hopefully that answered that question.
That definitely makes so much sense because you know there's so many layers attached here, and it's not
Mm.
just a one-step process, or it doesn't happen overnight. Because when we talk about mind, we often, it has been studied that most of our thoughts, most of our experiences and memories, they are all in subconscious. I mean, we do not even
Mm.
consciously know what's getting into our subconscious. 80 to 90% of it goes into that part, and only 10
Totally.
we are able to utilize. So, um, if there is an ingrained trauma, a childhood trauma, or some kind of environment that we have grown up into, which kind of makes us constrained in the way we express ourselves or we think about us or maybe other people around us. I think it takes a lot of time for the healing to be done. Of course, I mean, yeah, it had to be a very long answer. I think it could be an own discussion of its own.
Entirely, absolutely. And the healing is very layered, as you mentioned as well. There's so many layers to what can come up, and then how we process that, and how we reframe that into a new perspective for ourselves.
True. Also, this I think very, very important, movement and exercise, but it's easier said than done because, especially again, if I bring the perspective of working women or caregivers, um, it's very difficult to squeeze out time for that
Mm.
movement. Yeah, we can, of course, adjust, maybe doing household chores or going out for maybe doing your errands or something like that. But according to you, Sal, is there any best type of exercise for managing stress and burnout, and why exactly it is so important in mental and emotional well-being?
That's such a great question as well, Sana. I think it all depends on where somebody's actually at physically, and perhaps even what they feel called to do or what they feel they would like to do. Because if we're trying to force ourselves to do physical exercise, really, that's actually going to be to our detriment. In some respects, there's so many variations with this. I think the more that we can lean into things that bring us joy, whether that might be movement through dance or movement through just gentle stretching if our energy is low, and particularly as women, depending on where you are in your cycle. I started tracking my cycle a number of years ago, and that's been extremely beneficial to me on my weeks when my energy is starting to get a bit low, tending towards the end of my cycle and the start of my new cycle. I will tend to have a deload week with my weight training. So I won't be pushing as hard. I won't be training as hard. And, I may incorporate just more gentle walks. I tend to like a daily walk. I think walking is one of the best things that we can do for our physical and mental well-being on a daily basis. And whether it's 5 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour, whatever you can fit into your day and whatever works for you. And I think if we can incorporate some beautiful big deep breaths and some fresh air and some sunlight in that, I think that that's a really beautiful way to start the day and to gently wake up the body. But I'm also a huge believer in weight training, but I certainly wouldn't be advising anybody to dive into that if their nervous system was compromised through burnout or through physical exhaustion. And it's really only been the last 18 months for me personally that I've really started to get back into my heavy weight training again. But I do feel that building muscle, particularly for women, over the age of 30, even before the age of 30, but particularly after the age of 30, I think is very proactive in maintaining our health and well-being. But again, it comes back to whatever feels really good. There are some studies that indicated going for a run and things like that can really help if your body is very much in a state of survival and you've got a lot of cortisol, your body's in that fight flight response. Going for a run and discharging some of that survival energy can be quite helpful in allowing the body to drop back into a more parasympathetic, which is the rest, the digest, the relaxation, the regeneration state of like of the nervous system. However, if somebody's really, really burnt out, that would be the very last thing. Doing high pressure cardio and things like that. Again, I would be stripping that back to what feels manageable and isn't leaving you feeling wiped out afterwards. I think with any form of movement or exercise, you want to be actually feeling good at the end of it. One of the telltale signs for me, certainly with my training, when I did go into burnout, was pushing things very, very hard. And at the end of my training, I was literally coming home and needing to sleep for like 30 minutes to an hour, which again was a huge red flag that I was well and truly overdoing it. So I think it all depends on where you're physically at currently. And like anything, stress, any form of stress, certainly, physical stress through physical exercise can be very adaptive and can actually help build resilience. But the caveat to it is ensuring that we get enough rest and recovery time. That is when it becomes adaptive and actually will expand our capacity and our resilience. But if you're consistently pushing yourself and not giving yourself recovery time in between, that is when that stress will actually become maladaptive and our window of tolerance within our nervous system will become smaller and smaller and smaller. Therefore, stress will impact us at a greater and greater level and take us outside of that window of tolerance. So, just really important to keep in mind where we're at, and also what would bring us joy in our movement.
Exactly, exactly. That's a very, very mindful approach. Great, great. So, Sal, before we wrap up this conversation, if our listeners would connect with you, they would wish to connect with you and explore about your resources, your programs, your work, how they can do that.
Absolutely. So the best way is probably through my link tree, which is just linktree/Sal Holden, SALHOLDEN. That's got my website. It's got some really great resources, some free downloads, as well as some paid courses. But most of all, yeah, lots of really great free resources. And if anybody's experiencing burnout, they can also grab a copy of my Thrive book from that particular link as well.
Great. We'll have all the details in the show notes there. And Sal, thank you so much for this enlightening, practical conversation. Really, I'm really appreciative of your wisdom, your insights, the practical strategies you have shared today. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sana. It's been wonderful to be here with you, and a huge thank you to all the listeners as well.
Lovely, lovely. And to our listeners, if today's conversation has connected with you, don't forget to connect with Sal. You can refer to the show notes. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us and share this episode with someone who needs it. Even if even a change in one person's life is definitely a big change. So until next time, stay mindful and take care of yourself. Thank you.